Unique people leading unique lives shape and inform Iowa City. This community is enhanced by these women and men who live in our midst, working, teaching, creating. Welcome to a series of conversations with people who have stories to tell. Join my guests and me, Ellen Buchanan, in a series of interviews called One of a Kind. Fred Woodard is a professor and head of the African American World Studies program at the University of Iowa. Woodard, a native of Oklahoma, is an authority on Afro-American literature and culture. He taught at West High School in Davenport, Black Hawk Junior College in Moline, Coe College in Cedar Rapids, and Cornell College in Mount Vernon before joining the U of I faculty in 1976. In 1978, he became co-editor of the Iowa Review Literary Journal. He chaired the University Committee on Human Rights and served as an advisor to the Afro-American Graduate Students Association. Gaining a reputation as a creative problem solver with sound judgment, Fred, in 1981, became Associate Dean of the faculty in the Office of Academic Affairs. 8 years later, he was named Associate Vice President for Academic Affairs. He was Acting Director of the Museum of Art and Interim Director of the International Writers Program, both for 2 years. Professor Woodard's love of writing and art has been a lifetime interest as a participant in the Writers' Workshop, a teacher of drama and literature, as a poet and a painter. His special interests are pastels and calligraphy. He's had exhibitions in San Francisco and Iowa City. Art has influenced his home. He turned part of his house into a gallery which showcases various artists. He named the space the Arbour Gallery. Besides teaching, administrating his art, his artistic endeavors, Fred Woodard is the father of 6 children: Adrian, Fred Jr., Rachel, Erica, John, and Geraldine. Welcome to One of a Kind.
Thank you very much.
I know your story begins in Dover, Oklahoma in January of '39, and soon after that you moved, after you were born, you moved to Kansas City and grew up there.
That is correct.
What are some of your memories of growing up in Kansas City?
Well, I would start with memories going back to Oklahoma because they figure very large in my life. I remember probably the earliest memory is being on a boat in floodwater from my front door. I was probably 2.5, 3 years old, and I remember going in that boat to higher ground, and up that higher ground was a candy store, and I remember we were given candies from a large bubble glass thing, and I've been fascinated by that memory. Oklahoma.
of being flooded
Yeah,
out.
being flooded out and going to higher ground. Then, of course, I moved from my birthplace in Dover to Enid, Oklahoma. And Enid is a place I remember with lots of cousins. And also, I remember my father coming home from the war as a soldier, and I think it was the last time I was to see my father until I was 17 years old that day, and that's a striking memory that shows up a lot of places in my art.
Where did he go?
Well, he was mustered out of the U.S. Army and then went to California. He and my mother got a divorce. They were sort of separated that day, I remember. And they were later divorced. And we would not touch base again. I would not touch base again with him until I was 17.
Right before you graduated?
Right before I graduated from high school, yes, yes. I distinctly remember having joined the Marine Reserves at 17 and going on a bivouac to California, Camp Pendleton, I believe it was, for 2 weeks. And one of the highlights of the 2 weeks was to spend a weekend in Los Angeles looking for my father. And I found him.
You found him?
Yeah, after 17 years. Well, not 17 years, but after maybe, 12 years. And it was rather fascinating because in my youthful imagination, I just wanted to let him know that I still existed, and I just wanted to look at him.
What was his response?
Well, it was really strange because I had traced him down to a barbershop where he would usually come after work because the barbershop is a great institution in the black community. People gather and talk whether they need to have a haircut or not. And I was waiting for him because the barber had told me that he would be coming along shortly after 12 o'clock. And so he came along the road, and the barber said, here comes Ralph now. And so I went outside and waited for him to come. And then I said, hello, Mr. Woodard, how are you? And he says, fine. And I said, do you know me? And he says, well, I don't know. Why should I know you? And I said, well, look very carefully. And he said, oh, you're one of those Fitzgeralds. Now, Fitzgerald was his mother's maiden name. And he could tell I was a Fitzgerald by the way my jawline jutted out. And there are several people in the family that have a prominent jawline. And I said, no, I'm actually your son, Fred. And he dropped his pail on the street, his lunch pail, and he started to cry, And I didn't quite understand the reason for all of that until I talked to my mother. And I learned from my mother that my father and his sisters had badgered her because they believed that I was not my father's child. And as it turned out, I looked more like the rest of the Fitzgeralds than
your mother's side.
Well, then my mother's side, yes, yes. It was very, 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 very interesting experience.
Your mother must have been quite a woman.
Yes, my mother was the primary teacher in my life. It taught me a lot about patience and a lot about thinking, she used to say, that if we paid more attention to how it is we think, then we could teach ourselves a lot about thinking.
Did she take you to the Nelson Art Gallery, or did you get there on your own?
Well, now, my mother didn't take me, but she certainly went with me after I badgered her a while. But in the 3rd grade at Bruce Elementary School in Kansas City, we had an excursion to the Nelson Art Gallery as a class. And I just fell in love with what I saw, and particularly the Oriental things. Somehow, all of the writing on things and the images that were so sharp and clear, and even the ones that were muted had a way of dragging me into that. And I was fascinated by the calligraphy. Of course, it was many years later that I learned to call it calligraphy. But I thought all of that funny little writing there was a language, and somebody could actually speak that in the same way that we speak English. And I always wanted to know what that was. But long before I learned what it was, I started copying it. And I would go to the museum, and what I was to learn by the time I got through high school was by learning Chinese calligraphy, I could learn to make all the strokes that I needed to create anything. I mean, to draw, not only just to make to make letters, but to draw. It seems to capture all of the necessary emotion to capture figures. So I started in artwork really with calligraphy, and loving calligraphy. Went on to do other things in high school and in undergraduate school in art, and then I let it go for a long time.
You did, because you went to Davenport after college and got a teaching job there, correct?
That is correct.
And
yeah.
got married to a young woman that you had known since junior high,
yes.
Sandra.
Sandra.
And had 3 children by her, and then she died very, very young.
Yes.
And
yes.
You had 3 children by her.
Yes. Yeah, Sandy and I were good friends from junior high school forward, and we married early and had really 3 wonderful children. 2 of them are musicians, actually. The 2 left-handed ones are professional musicians. Adrian, the oldest, who's a drummer, and was in Iowa City, West High School's, I think, big time company or some kind of company.
Good time company.
Good time company, yes. And quite a singer and performer. And then Fred Jr. is a jazz musician in Boston. In fact, both of them will be performing at this year's Jazz Festival in Iowa City. So it'll be very,
a little family reunion, too.
A family reunion, yes. And the 3rd child is Rachel, who is a nurse at the University Hospital. Now, those are Sandy's children, and it was really very, very, very sad to lose her so early. But that was a period that taught me an awful lot about myself and independence, trying to raise 3 children and continue to teach high school in that. I did get a great deal of help, though.
From friends and
from
colleagues.
Friends, relatives, and even had a chance to have my children stay with my sister in Kansas City for a period before we got settled here in Iowa City.
What brought you to Iowa City?
Well, once at Davenport, I read in a Sunday newspaper, saw this picture of Phil Hubbard. And I think it was the time that Phil Hubbard had become the associate dean of the faculties, actually. And there was a long story about him coming up from Missouri, his mother being a school teacher, and Philip having come to the University of Iowa, having earned a doctorate in engineering. And I thought it was absolutely fascinating history. And it was nice to see that someone of his caliber and commitment was at the University of Iowa. I had always wanted to come to the to the writer's workshop at Iowa, and did apply and was accepted. And I came, and one of the persons I met when I first arrived was Phil Hubbard. And that was a wonderful, wonderful chance meeting, but I told him I saw him first in the newspaper, and it made it wonderful.
Was this in the 60s now?
This was in the 60s. Actually, it was 66, the summer of 66 when I...
So you were here during the unrest on the campus.
Yes.
And I read in an article that you have a lot of respect for Sandy Boyd's leadership at this time and other people's leadership.
Yeah, it was a rather fascinating period in retrospection, I think, because it was a time of unrest, and particularly at about the time of 1968. I believe that Sandy Boyd was the vice president for academic affairs at that time. And I I remember right after the Martin Luther King assassination, there were announcements about the university taking a forward step in being sort of creative in its leadership about how to integrate African American life, culture into the curriculum here at the university and establish some of the programs. Sandy became president and later, and he had a magnificent way of dealing with the unrest. He knew or came to know who some of the leaders were on campus, and he rejoiced in their willingness and sense of freedom to protest, but he also wanted to capture some of their energy for constructive work on the campus, the change that needed to take place here. It was one thing indeed for us to resist and protest things happening millions of miles, hundreds of miles away from us, but what could we do here to bring about some change? So I had a way of harnessing the energy and putting us on committees, and before you know it, you were working out all of this frustration and doing something constructive on a committee. So Sandy was really quite creative in the way he went about solving several problems. I mean, I think he had an influence on how we protested lots of things in the world. But also, I think he had a great influence on teaching us to hold on to our convictions, but also to move in a direction of being a part of a community that was making an effort to bring about change.
Now, you've worn many hats at the university. I know I've read that you love teaching, especially undergraduates.
Yes.
And you did that for a period of time before they tapped you and brought you into administration.
Yes.
Was that hard leaving the classroom? Or were you ready for a change?
I was ready for a change, but I did not give up the classroom. I mean, for 2-3 years into administration, I managed to teach at least one class a semester. I couldn't entirely leave the students alone because they were a source of my own creativity. There was something wonderful about getting the undergraduates and not trying immediately to fill them up with a lot of rhetoric of the discipline, as it were, but rather to explore the rhetoric of their own thinking, their own presentation of themselves. No matter what the subject matter, we needed to get at something inside them that would commit them to learning from themselves. They'd not been taught
Like
that they
your
could
mother
learn
taught
from.
you.
Yeah, exactly,
Yeah.
exactly, yeah. And quite frankly, that's been my greatest teaching tool. And it did me a lot of good to realize that my mother's intuitive sense of things people had already written about, or maybe they had written about them before she told me, and certainly in the case of John Dewey and some theories of experience and education had been written about, but there's absolutely no chance that my mother ever read any of that. It was just from her own experience.
Well, when you moved into administration and you look back at that period of your chapter at Iowa, what were some of your challenges and what do you feel really good about that you accomplished?
Okay, I look back at administration with a lot of mixed emotions. You know, I say I'm an artist. I've never really claimed to be a kind of scholar in the way that a number of my mentors at Iowa were and are. But I was fascinated with just the idea of always being conscious that you're in a teaching moment. even when you're learning, you're also teaching. And I took that attitude into central administration, and I think being the associate dean of the faculties and dealing with faculty personnel issues, I probably learned best to deal with faculty disputes. There were a number of them on the books when I got there. Yes, things that had been going on for a number of years. And it was very interesting to find ways with the parties concerned, talking sometimes 3 or 4 different meetings to get a perspective on how to resolve things so that we saved our integrity, the integrity of each of our points of view, but in the interest of solving the problem, we find a way to do it. So we all save face.
Peacemaker.
And yes, and we find a way to save face. And one time I, after struggling with a couple of faculty members for maybe 5, 6 meetings, it seemed to click for all of us what was really happening. There was a sense that I had, in a very nice way, said that the 2 of them were acting like adolescents, and not only that, but siblings. And so we start talking about just something crazy like birth order and where they were in the family and so forth and so on, and blah, 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 blah. And it come to find out they had more in common, and one of the reasons that they didn't get along was that one always had to win over the other. It had, after a while, nothing to do with the issues that brought them at loggerheads in the first place, but it became a personality thing.
And too much alike, maybe.
Yeah, well, something like that, yeah. Actually, after we talked it over, they shook hands, and they were pretty good friends. We had lunch together often to sort of celebrate finding a solution. It was something we stumbled upon, I mean, sort of improv as a way, you know.
My goodness.
Yeah.
Well, and you got that reputation for being this kind of a mediator and problem solver, and you were tapped for the Museum of Art, and then you were tapped for the International Writers Program.
Yes.
But that was a pivotal time for you because you experienced the loss of your wife, Barbara.
Barbara, yes.
And that kind of brought you back in touch with your art.
That is so, yes. It also sent me twirling through space because I remember distinctly the night Barbara died. I from the hospital called on Leo and June Davis to come to the hospital to be with me. Leo is from Kansas City as well. He's a little bit older. We had shared in common not only the high school, but a number of the professors. And they were the people I was closest to. But on the telephone, I said to Leo, Sandy is dead.
Which was your first wife.
That was my first wife, but it was, in fact, Barbara this time who was dead. And I realized for the first time that when Sandy died, I had just substituted work for grieving. And that slip-up kept coming back again and again. I had to find a way to resolve that, and I think one of the ways that I got at that was to spend a little more time with myself, and the art became a way of spending time with myself in the act of creating and watching myself create and watching what it was I was creating moved me very much deep inside that artistic self and helped me solve a number of the grieving problems. I mean, one, with Sandy, that had happened over, 25 years prior to that, and then trying to find a way to reconcile myself for just going on and sort of giving more and more and more and more of my time to other people. In that regard, I rather welcomed going to the museum as something else to do. It gave me a number of other people to meet and a series of problems to work out with other people, and that kept me outside of myself, those obligations. And then the international writing program was really quite a challenge, to be with a number of writers from all over the world, making really good friends, working then with Walling and Paul Ingle, and trying to get a perspective on the program and how we could continue the excellent reputation that the two of them had begun here. It was a wonderful experience, actually.
Did this event, the Arbour Gallery, came out of this experience, or had you been thinking about having a gallery in your home to showcase artists?
Well, actually, it was Barbara's idea, and we were in the process of remodeling the house at the time so that it would become a gallery. She was interested in providing some space for essentially local artists, some of whom she had worked with and had come to know in her capacity working with children with various kinds of learning disabilities, emotional as well as other kinds. And she had used some of the artists to work with her students. And the common complaint that she heard was there was not enough space in Iowa City for the local artists to have exhibitions. And I had quite a collection myself of things, and so we designed things so that we had plenty of wall space. And so after Barbara died, I went on with the gallery idea, and we've continued it with much success, I think.
Much success.
Yeah.
What are you working on now, personally? And
Okay, personally, I'm working on a number of things. As an artist, I've been working on canvas with acrylics now, and I've just completed a series of 4 very large pieces, each one of which I'm really very special. I'm also academically involved with a project to take a look at the Indian Ocean slave trade. I think not enough of my energy has been spent in exploring that part of history. It is that I've come to believe and to know, well, that Europeans did not discover slavery or invent it with the New World. That slavery was an old sort of thing going on. And I have found some very important places in the world where I can begin to do archaeological work that will reveal the Persians on the east coast of Africa, establishing trade routes for ivory and other kinds of things, and slaves, as early as the 11th century BC. And no telling what we will probably find from the very same site in Tanzania, quite frankly. But I'm interested in the slave trade as it went from Tanzania, actually Zanzibar, into the Middle East, through India and Indochina. And it certainly has gone on for a number of years. And some of the Africans who would appear in the Roman Empire, for example, as emperors and leaders in the Roman Empire, were part of that redistribution of human beings. Absolutely fascinating stuff.
you've got about another 30, 40 years of work ahead of you.
I certainly hope. Well, the other good thing is that when you work in a research university, you find students who are interested in such things from a different perspective, and they carry it on from their perspective. So whether I live for 30, 40 more years actively that way or not, I certainly hope not, but I know that I have a number of students who are moving in the direction, so it's fulfilling to know that they will go on with it.
I know you've influenced many people, students and friends. I'm always interested in, besides your mother, whom you mentioned, who has had an influence on you over the years?
At Iowa Wesleyan College, I met two people, one Esther Webb, who is now dead, professor, and Louis A. Hassemeyer, both in the English department at Iowa Wesleyan College. They were very, very influential in the formative years, my 18-year-old to 21-year-old years, because they always expected more of me than I ever gave them, but because they were so dissatisfied with my performances, they kept pushing me and pushing me and pushing me. And then when I started writing and publishing, they were very happy, and I think they did a lot to sort of push me on my way. And then shall I have to say that Phil Hubbard was always a kind of model of mine for a kind of gentle spirit that I so coveted. Unfortunately, I've always had to live with the person that I am, and sometimes that's not a gentle person. But lovingly, I would like to be, when I grow up, like Phil Hubbard. You know.
He's a wonderful human being.
Yes.
And so we don't leave out, we mentioned your 3 older children. Let's, my last question is, let's talk briefly about your last 3 children so we don't leave them out. Where are they and what are they about?
Okay, the 4th child is Erica. Erica is in Kansas City, Missouri. She is a gospel singer, and so that's the 3rd professional musician in the family. I lied a lot. I told them I was the best musician, and they spent their lifetimes doing better than me when they were really at junior high school much better musicians. Then there's John, who's away at Yale at New Haven, and Geraldine, who is a senior at City High School. So, and she's here and enjoys working at a department store in town, and John is, you know, at that stage where he's not really sure whether he's going to be in applied mathematics or economics or something, but we're waiting. We're very, very
patiently. And Iowa City is your home. You said I looked at your passport. It's been stamped all over the world and all over the you know, you've been all over the United States, but you really feel that Iowa City is your home.
Iowa City is home. I often say that it's such a lovely place to come home to. I mean, and particularly when I've been traveling internationally. I get this horrible feeling of depression when I sat down in New York or Chicago. But in that peaceful little ride, you know, you're hardly up and then you're down again from Chicago, I adjust myself to coming home, and I look forward to Iowa City as home. It's a lovely place to be.
Well, we're glad you're here and this is your home. Thank you for being my guest.
Thank you.
My guest on One of a Kind has been Professor Fred Woodard. He has influenced, like I said, many students, colleagues, and friends. Professor Woodard has served the university faithfully in various capacities: head of the African American World Studies program, a teacher in the English department, administrator, associate vice president in the Office of Academic Affairs, interim director of the Museum of Art, International Writers Program. Colleagues and friends describe Fred as an outstanding and creative problem solver, an excellent teacher, compassionate, very flexible, a dreamer, and wise. What enduring qualities. Fred Woodard is one of a kind.